Welcome to the Generational Awakening YouTube channel. Our aim is to encourage, equip, and empower Christian leaders and parents to effectively nurture the next generation, become resilient, lifelong disciples of Jesus. Today, we welcome our special guest, Evi Rodemann. Evi is passionate about the young generation in Europe. She coordinates the European Youth Ministry Network, the CEO of LeadNow, and serves the Lausanne Movement on the leadership team of the Younger Leaders Generation. Evi is also on the leadership team of the Mission Commission under the World Evangelical Alliance, thinking about missional issues and helping with their global conferences. Hi, Evi. It's wonderful to have you with us today.
Yeah, great to see you, Harry. Thank you.
Yes, I think the last time we saw each other, it was before COVID, so it's wonderful to see you and be able to share together today.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, how would you describe the present state of youth ministry in Europe and beyond?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not sure I can say so much about beyond, and even Europe is so big. But when I hear this question, I think there are two sides in me. One is that I see, lots of hope around Europe and lots of challenges. And sometimes I have to decide how I get up in the morning, how hopeful I am, or do I see challenges first? And so I think the first thing which really gives me so much hope is that God is at work. He has never left the continent. He's not just working in Asia or Brazil and other nations. He's right here in Europe. And that gives me so much hope. And seeing, how does he work in churches, in local churches, but also across the nation. And I also see lots of hope when I just think of the incredible youth leaders we've got in Europe. They work so hard. They try to innovate where possible. I see so many of these youth leaders, go extra miles. And some youth work, not everywhere, but some youth work even during the pandemic, we have seen numbers grow. Wherever youth leaders have gone, like house to house visitation. Once again, looking after these young ones, they have actually seen growth. And seeing people one-on-one, and where young people have been seen and cared for. This has been really fantastic, and also, I'm very hopeful that despite, I think, the crisis we're in Europe, I see the real desire for cooperations. People are desperate to learn from one another, knowing that it's not just one of us having the complete truth on how to run youth ministry in our local churches or in our nation, but actually doing that across, Europe, across nations. I find totally exciting. But also, on the other hand, Harry, I see lots of challenges. I don't know about you, but it seems to be that when I look at my German context, it is so much harder bringing people together. And some conferences really go big, and others, it's very hard. I think even in 23, actually bringing people together, and it's harder to motivate them to come along. I feel that also, like we had one of the statistics in Germany through the pandemic, that we have lost lots of youth workers in our churches. And I see that also across Europe. I don't have, statistics on that, but I see that, we have lost key volunteers, people serving our youth ministry. So it is so much harder to sustain the work in our churches, but also like in our youth ministries. We have very limited resources, and how does that look like? And then, of course, there are different issues young ones deal with, and different challenges. And so, how do we deal with that? What are the young ones going through? So that would be sort of my summary of, I'm very hopeful. At the same time, I'm deeply challenged, and also sometimes heartbroken by what's happening with our young generation in Europe.
Yes, well, what concerns you most about what you see, and what also excites you most?
Yeah, we start with the concern. But I'm just really concerned for people being so tired. At the moment, I feel like every person I sort of talk to, it's not just a young person, but when I think of leaders in churches and youth ministries, they're they seem to be so tired and at the brink of burning out. And I wonder what it does to our young people. There's this American pastor, Kerry Newhoff, has his regular blog posts and podcasts. And he was sharing a few months ago saying that about 50% of leaders at the moment are thinking of giving up, leaving ministry. And I thought, like, wow, this is such a high number, and so I'm concerned that actually I'm always questioning, how do we run the race well and finish well? How do we, pace our time and so on. So, and I'm also very concerned about, Christian leaders creating a big mess. In some areas, we have seen leaders fall in different places, and has huge implications for our young people in Europe. We're not just watching, American news, we're watching also, European news. And so that's very heartbreaking. And for them, the big question is, can we still trust? Can we still trust our youth leaders? And I'm also concerned about churches and youth work. So I wonder if we have limited answers to the questions the young people are raising. I wonder how we're addressing issues they don't even care about. At the same time, I'm super excited about the young generation. I think they're amazing. I do think they're so passionate. Once they're sort of, they have found their cause of passion, they just want to see changes happening. And I think they ask the right questions, critical questions. And I'm sure you came across that one, but Kara Powell, she did a research, I think she published that in 21. She interviewed about, I think, 3,000 teenagers, saying, what are their critical questions? She published a book on that, and she came up with the 3 typical questions, teenagers are saying or raising up. And they were like, who am I? Where do I belong? And what difference can I make? So, and I wonder, what is our response to these questions? How do we help the young generation? But I see that the young people really care about this. They care about environment, they care about justice, they care about faith, and how does it play out? So that is really one of the things which excite me.
Yes, well, it's certainly a very real need, but I agree that those are issues that the young people are really concerned about, certainly in the conversations that I've been having as well.
And I think, when I think of, Kara Powell's, like the book and the research she did, I was wondering, Harry, does it apply to our European context just as much? I'm not sure, because we haven't done the research. But when I engage with the young generation, I feel exactly these are the same questions they want to have answers to. They want to know who they are, and also what is their home. So how are we responding to this question?
Yes, and really helping our young people to really, as Jesus said, to recognize his voice, recognize that they are his sheep, because he is the one who gives us our identity, our value. And as we learn to listen to his voice, then he will be the one showing us what is on his heart for us and where he wants to lead us. And it's that growing intimacy, that growing trust as children move into the teenage years and youth, then that will be a progressive, deepening experience. And I think that's something we need to give much more focus and attention to as parents and as leaders, and just the way in which we are discipling our children.
Yeah, and do we give them opportunities, when they are sort of, eager to make a difference? Where do we give them opportunities to serve, in our local churches? Do they actually see that their voice matters or not?
Yes, and that they have many opportunities that we can provide our children with to serve as children. And that as they move into teen years, they can just be wonderful examples and volunteers helping with the younger children, because they're much closer to them. And there's such a need and such a challenge, but again, the potential is there if we will see it and encourage it. Well, what do you see as the main issues that Christian youth are struggling with? and what kind of help is available for them and their parents?
Well, I'm not sure if, they're maybe my main issues, and that might not be the European issues, but maybe just answering to that, what Kara Powell was asking, like the young ones are asking, who am I? I wonder, how do we, deal with that identity confusion of who am I? I think the young people care less about it. They have made up their mind, but what does it mean for us as Christians about our identity, who we are, and also looking at this generation gap between these different generations. Who am I in the whole mix? And also is that there's lots of shame around young people. So how do we work with that? Also thinking of the loneliness, which is also tied in with identity. Who cares about me? So I think that's a huge topic of identity confusion today. Who am I? And I wonder, I ask young people, are you addressing that in church? And hardly ever, says this is actually talked about in our youth groups. And I think, young ones are totally confronted every day on TikTok and wherever. Another thing I find it's a huge issue for them is that they're very uncertain about their future. Maybe that ties in with the justice and the environmental concern. But for them, the future looks quite bleak. Now we have a war, at our doorstep. We see the dramatic, inflations in various countries in Europe, unemployment. I really feel that they're very tired in many ways. We talk about the tiredness of their soul. They're hopeless about their future. They don't know what are they getting into. Is it worth still finishing school and studying or something? So the question, is there any future for them? And I also find them in that regard, they're very dissatisfied with where they are right now and not feeling that they have a voice, someone to really raise that. I think Fridays for Future, with these young ones was a huge thing. Young ones were raising their voices around environmental concern, but it sort of has just dwindled. Now it's back to whatever. So what are the opportunities? And then another thing I think is the main issue is, how do we address faith? How do we pass on faith? What are the questions the young ones are asking? And are they actually interested in any faith? Because one of the research which came out of Youthscape is saying the young ones don't raise any questions. Or are we answering questions they have not asked? So what is truth? What is faith in that regard? Is it very subjective? Everyone, creates their own God. And also feeling that we as leaders, we are sometimes not very good in addressing these questions. Maybe that because we're scared or we don't know how to be apologetic, about our faith and being able to maybe defend that in a good way. But I think there are great resources out there. I think we should have more. So I'm really pleading, with youth ministries, youth centers, research centers to come up with stuff. But I was just really, very encouraged. In Germany, or a German-speaking world, we have a guy, Andy Fronius, and he created Mr. Jugendarbeit, which is like Mr. Youth Work, translated into English. And every week, they send out fantastic stuff. Some of it's translated from other places, but fantastic stuff around the trends of young people, what they're needing, ideas for parents, ideas for youth work, for youth groups, what to target. And I think, this is such a role model to me. And it's just really just blown up over the last 2 years. So it is right in the pandemic when someone was addressing these needs. Or I think of, the Youthscape Research Center, where they provide us with latest trends and ideas, mainly that's Britain-based, but really exciting stuff. Or there's a new research center in Germany at Gießen, where they offer tools. And some of it's just bringing this together and saying, actually, what is available in Europe? Often that's my problem, or maybe yours too, Harry. We don't always know what's out there. We don't know what's happening. So, having a network where resources are shared, and there are some incredible stuff out there. And I just think that the power is so much that, we have a chance. with English, you get very far in Europe. So we have a chance of actually collaborating and connecting and learning from some of the best ministries. So what I like to do, I'm privileged to know quite a few youth ministries in Europe, and I call up these CEOs and say, what's happening? What are you working on? What are you exploring? What gives you hope at the moment? And that is so enlightening. And I think, wow, this is such a great tool. How can we play this out? How could we apply this to Germany, for example? I just came across, I love Exodus from Northern Ireland, as you also know, Jim Brown and the others there. And, they started something last year about fathers and children's camps with a huge success. I thought, okay, if it's, something around fathers and their children, they thought there's a real gap there. So they have been able to step into that and really see that making progress. So I wonder, how much space we can make to engage and also do something, in a fun related way, which is also scripture based as they do. So I think this is some of the encouragement which I get about, main issues, and saying, actually, we're not just overwhelmed by the issues, but actually we have tangible things we can actually start working on.
Yes, those are some good examples I've found. Just the ways that with the family crisis, what are the resources and help that we can provide, and especially for parents and for mothers and for fathers, to be able to just have that closer relationship with their children, where so many of the identity issues and the value issues are really rooted and affirmed in those relationships. And it's also our desire with the generational awakening to make some of those great resources known, be it for children's work, for parenting, be it for youth work. And so sharing some of the stories, which is also why it's great to have people like you here with us, sharing some of what you're seeing and some of what you're doing, so that people can connect with you and be able to learn of other opportunities, which very often are totally unknown or ignored.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are some of the mission opportunities that youth can get involved in today?
Well, I think even just offering these opportunities, I think, is very essential. As you know, that the way we grow is not just being in our own, in our own premises, but actually we grow as we serve. And even mission opportunities is something across another culture, crossing borders, crossing our own comfort zone. So, and, I think looking back, there are some statistics saying, how do we disciple, a young generation? And going on mission trips can be totally vital, can be actually life-changing. And as we talk about, young generation wanting to make a difference, I think it is super important that we're not just offering church camps and youth camps over the summer, but are there some elements where we actually cross boundaries? And so, I was very young when I went on a mission trip, and it was, powerful. So what can we do? And so, I think there are various youth ministries in Europe who offer such trips. So I always want to encourage, a local youth group and saying, what is out there, explore what's in your nation or what's in other nations in Europe. And maybe even, thinking about which other European nation can you visit, or can you have a collaboration of various youth ministries together. So, for example, I learned this actually from Jim Brown in Exodus. He challenged me one day, probably about 15 years ago, but he said, let's not just talk missions or offer mission trips, but actually live it out. And so I personally made a commitment that every year I would run a mission trip somewhere. And I'm saying it's not just me going somewhere, but I always will take some young people along. And often, I engage with young leaders, so I take young leaders often along. So for example, next year, together with Armour Europe, which is a UK trust, we just had to postpone because of the Ukrainian war, but we are building a house in Moldova together. So, you can take people into that mission trip. They don't even necessarily have to be fully convinced about Jesus, but serving on a mission trip can, as Exodus has shared, I mean, you can actually, you see young ones becoming Christian because they just see, wow, the power of the word of God coming alive in such a context. And so every year, I think about mission opportunities, and I know lots of people around Europe do. I had a very fascinating experience last year in 22. I offered 2 trips to the Balkan region. One was like a 3-week tour, and we visited 15 countries in Europe with our little minivan. And wherever we went, we tried to explore, what are the needs of a young generation. We met some incredible leaders. I mean, we were heartbroken by the situations, but it has, shifted something in our minds. The young ones who came with, will think differently about money, as we came across situations where they have such limited resources. And also seeing God at work, and sometimes in churches which are, tiny. When I think of Montenegro in Europe, with maybe 75 indigenous Christians, it's tiny. But then, encouraging them and saying, we believe in you guys, can make such a difference. And these leaders there, I mean, they go the extra mile, and it's breaking their hearts, but they're committed. And so I always think, what are the options we offer, and how do we think about making a difference through what we offer, and also going somewhere. And then I think, if we have that learning attitude as a young generation, going somewhere and engaging, with people from another culture can be so uplifting, can bridge some of the gaps in Europe, and also, just create some incredible friendships.
I think those are some wonderful ideas, Evi. And I remember that one of the most powerful experiences I've had on a mission trip was going with youth to build homes in Tijuana, and very much in line with Amor, what Amor is doing in Moldova. And certainly the impact it had in my own life, as well as the young people, I could see as the days went on, just the change, in their language and their attitudes, and then some of the stories they shared at the end showed that God had really done a deep work in their hearts. So I think those are the kind of opportunities which even we can do as a family, I think, on a simpler level, but just connecting with other Christians in other countries. And certainly the Zoom and makes those sorts of possibilities and keep in contact with people much easier today.
Yeah.
Well, you've just published a book. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Yeah, it was published in 22, and I think it ties in with my maybe my passion here for young generation and with youth leaders or young leaders. There's, I love the young generation, and I'm very concerned at the same time. I also partly work for the Lausanne Movement, so it all ties in with the same burden I carry. That I wonder, how do we, last in faith and ministry? So, heartbroken by so many young leaders crashing in leadership and not having someone come alongside. And so sometimes it's not just that you sort of have a bad leadership experience, but that actually something leads to it, that you're giving up your faith. And faith or God no longer has anything to do with your life, and you have a bad experience, and sometimes people start then turning against God or saying he doesn't love me enough. I mean, sometimes I wonder, if we have the right theology in that regard, because I think when I live with Jesus, everything is going to be great. But we know it's not true. I mean, the New Testament talks about it. When you follow Jesus, carry your cross and carry his burden and so on. But so in that regard, I wrote a book on leadership and pain. And one of the leaders, actually the CEO of the Lausanne Movement, Michael O, he said once a statistic, he said 60% of all leaders do not finish. It wasn't just not finishing well, but it was just they don't finish. They don't last in that game, let's say, game of leadership, and saying it is so hard, it can be so stressful, internally, externally, there are different factors out there, and they are not finishing well. And so my question is, I say I can't spare pain in leadership, because I think it's part of it. It's like, one coin with two sides. It goes hand in hand, as you well know, Harry. But also, I wonder, how can we support them and saying, actually, when pain comes, it's not just because God has abandoned you. It's part of life and part of leadership. And how do we walk together through that? And so that's really my burden. And the German title is like Scheitern erwünscht, which means like a failure desired. It sounds a bit ambiguous, but it's like saying, actually failing is part of it. And how do we develop that sort of failing culture, and saying, just because, we messed up or something, I mean, God is right in there helping us, and helping us to get back on our feet and walk with him. So that's my real plea here, and my desire to come alongside young leaders.
Well, I look forward to seeing the book in English someday. And
yeah, that would be my dream.
Yes, well, just keep us informed so we can share that with others. And I know it's you've a lot of very deep things to share.
Yeah.
Well, as we conclude our time, Evi, what would you like viewers to do? Some are pastors, some are parents, some are teachers and volunteers working with youth, working with children. So what would you call us to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have a one sentence slogan, but maybe I give you a few of my thoughts on that. I hope that we as churches, we make children and youth work and whatever, this intergenerational work, a priority. That we're not just, waiting for the young ones to grow up, but make it a priority today. And I wonder how it ties in with offering intergenerational activities. So often we have it compartmentalized, this is children, teenagers, youth work, and so on. But what is it that we offer across the whole span of generations? I was just at a Lausanne gathering last week, where we had 5 generations working alongside each other in a sort of learning style community. So it was very mutual. And I wonder, how do we create that mutuality in our church's context? And also, are we willing to have intergenerational leadership teams, So in that sense of, are we giving a voice to the young generation, saying, you don't have to be 40 to be recognized as a leader, but could we have a 20-year-old or even a younger one serving on our teams, And then my other, plea would be, that we regularly listen to these various age groups and their concerns and their needs. And the real power is in praying for one another. Last night I was in a home group. I was reading out of my book, and I had 4 moms there who were struggling with their teenagers in the house. I mean, they really go through very tough times, and so the young ones as well as the moms or the parents. So as they were sharing, we prayed and we supported. And so I wonder, how is that kind of support system out there? And that we're not just waiting for it. And I was just reminded of that, that when I was 13, when I was asked to become involved in children's ministry, it was like a midweek Sunday school every Wednesday afternoon. It was meeting in a fire engines place, so that was an interesting place. But every Wednesday, and there was an older lady who asked me to come alongside and serve with her. And that was very profound, that someone saw my giftings, my passion, and got me integrated. So I wonder, how do we integrate, people into our various ministries intergenerationally?
Yes, well, that's a great vision, and something that I seek to encourage in our own church as well in Belgium. And I think that's something which, indeed, we must really seek to engage all the generations together much more. And I like the idea of having younger people and even children having the opportunity to share and give their thoughts on just life as a church, life as a community, life as a family. Well, Evi, thank you for being with us and for all you do to inspire and equip today's youth and the next generation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, below viewers will see information, what you shared, and there will be the links to the website and to your blog and your contact information. And so I invite those watching, if you found value in what we have shared today, I invite you to like this video and hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to be informed of each new video released. And let us know in the comments below what you find most helpful or encouraging and any questions you may have. Then share the link with friends and churches who would also be helped and inspired. And together, let's impact many more lives for good across all the generations. So thank you again for joining us today. Be blessed, and let's keep multiplying the blessing to others. Bye for now.